Why knowledge matters.
I am a creative and conscious strategist who really loves people and wants to see them thrive.
I love that, Katie. I'm a door opener who helps people find things they never knew out about themselves and achieve them.
That's beautiful. And as much and as wonderful your book is, I also truly find wonderful your story. And before we dive into the book, let's talk about your story, how you two met, and how everything ultimately unfolded. Let's start with Miss Edwards, and then we will switch to Miss McClary.
Well, Yannick, it starts out with us not even wanting to get to know each other. We were actually introduced, and it was a stormy night, and both of us were like, what can we do to get out of having a glass of wine together? We had enough friends, and we're like, I'm not sure I really want to meet this person. And Katie, we walked into the door of this wine bar, both with a bit of trepidation, and in the end, found out that, wow, it was the biggest miracle we could have created, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what's important to know is that we were both prejudging each other based off our labels. And this friend just kept saying, get to know her to both of us. And so when we sat down and had that glass of wine, which we both committed to doing, I would say within about 3 to 4 minutes, we knew that we were with the right person. And that even though that other person was really different than us, um, we could definitely find ways to be friends. And so I'm glad we listened to our friend and not our gut.
Yeah.
And it's so wonderful because today, really, in this polarized world, a Democrat and a Republican is always like cat and mouse, right? But you truly bridge the gap between one another. And one thing also people have to know, usually if you don't live in the United States, people have a tendency that's normal because you think like, well, you can kind of talk
Yeah.
badly about the US because it's the big guy, right? But everything that happens in the US ultimately spills over, right? In Canada,
Yes.
in Europe, everywhere, right? And so obviously everything that happens is, it's also an adversity, of course, but ultimately it's also an opportunity. And that's why it's so beautiful. And what you truly showed us that
Yeah.
it is possible. And ultimately you gave birth to such a wonderful book. And so, but let's first also talk a little bit about your common denominators. What is something that you discovered that you never thought you will discover from each other? Miss Cleary.
Yeah. So Jennifer is super, super smart. And I'm going to say that I'm super smart too. And when you get two smart, bold personalities in a room, competition can happen. And so we made a really intentional choice to be iron sharpens iron. And Jennifer, you have a great saying about a coin. And I really do think how we found our common denominators.
Yes, we actually believe that we represent two sides of a coin, and in America, it's a heads and tail representation. But Yannick, as you know, how much actually separates the coin? Millimeters. And it's really how we found out that we actually were more in common than we ever knew. Our values were the same: opportunities for all, scholastically. We wanted people to have health care. We believed in entrepreneurship. We believed in freedom. And we believed that each person has a right to have life and have dignity in their life, is what I mean. And you know what? We just found out we were going about it in different ways, and that the gap we were looking to bridge was bridgeable.
Mhm. And so often in America, we're just focused on differences. But when you get to that end game, we all want the same thing.
We do.
It's beautiful, and that's also why the U.S. everything that really comes out the U.S. is just so astonishing, right? Because it's like the friction that somehow creates something new, right? It's what engages us, and truly what you displayed, becoming creative, curious, right? And that's wonderful.
We have to remember our shared purpose. And in America, we have to keep remembering our shared purpose because polarization is going to tear us apart.
Yes, it is.
It's so important. I think everything we have, in the Western world is just unbelievably, uh, you know, beautiful, in
Mhm.
terms of opportunities we have. Of course, it can vary, but if you look at the small wins, if you look at what we actually have, with an abundance mindset, not with a luck mindset, then truly, and that's why always the US has always been a role model and still is, in so many ways, and so that's why it's not just for people in the US, but it's also important for other people, outside the US, what it actually, can give to us. But now, just a short and quick question is, what brought you, generally speaking, to entrepreneurship and business? You advise businesses, Fortune 500 companies. You are yourself an entrepreneur. Katie McCleary, Jennifer Edwards. You consult, and you are also part of a venture capital firm. So, what brought you in the first place in entrepreneurship and business?
Go
Well,
ahead,
we
Jen.
like to, okay, you want me to take it? Okay. So we like to think of the fact that business, it's actually a lot like a game. We're actually all playing a game. And in a game, our goal as entrepreneurs and leaders is to bring our best, highest selves to the work. And so when Katie and I entered entrepreneurship from very different paths, Katie in a nonprofit path, making an enormous difference in literacy across the region and the nation, and me much more from a business, traditional business side, we found each other and realized that the one thing we knew that would elevate business leaders and create more prosperity, more less suffering in the world is if we could teach people how to equip what we call their human suit, this thing that we can't zip on and off. If they could equip their human suit with greater curiosity, greater emotional intelligence, and a stronger ability to collaborate meaningfully. And so that's what brought us each individually and then together, Katie, wouldn't you agree, to want to do this business venture and make an impact?
I think we live at the intersection of prosperity and purpose. And that is one
Hmm.
of the best things about being in America, right? We have a ton of opportunities in which to achieve and pursue happiness. It is written into our doctrine. Well, happiness is not just about making as much money as possible and buying a dream house. Happiness is about purpose. And purpose for us as social creatures comes from connection, communication, collaboration, shared purpose. And so we have all these businesses, schools, nonprofit, social B Corps. We're all trying to just make a better life for ourselves. And it all starts with communication and collaboration. And so we decided to start the business from that mentality. And I think it's worked really well.
It's beautiful because it's so true, right? Whatever you talk, it's all ingrained in our social relationships, right? And so if you get them right, if you start actually applying the tools that you propose, and you start striving, right? Everything becomes an opportunity instead of kind of a really a headache, right? Because oftentimes, the hardest thing for people is going to the job, and there's always conflict,
Yeah.
always misunderstanding. It's so hard, even small things, right? It really screws your work relationship completely up, right? And your quality of life, because you bring it home, right? You can't leave it there. That's the thing. It's everything is integrated, even though we're talking about life balance, but it's really somehow integrated, and it's what you're doing. Obviously, I can tell, I can feel you're
Hmm.
truly living the purpose what you're doing, right? Because that's not just a business, but as you say, it's actually a game, right? It's actually life, business of life, because it's about creating and cultivating relationships, connections, right? That makes us truly human. Beautiful. So let's dive specifically into the book. And just to give us some context, let's start with the beautiful story of Amy.
Katie, why don't
Yeah.
you give it a go?
So your biology and your psychology, so your mind and your brain, are working in concert together to create your human experience. And we have this little cluster of cells way in the back of our brain called the amygdala. It's talked about a lot, and it's responsible for your survival, for flight, fight, freeze, all the things that we do when we feel under pressure. We have shortened the amygdala as Amy, and we personified her as an frenemy. Amy is always riding shotgun on your shoulder, scanning the environment to say, am I safe? Am I valuable? Am I understood? Am I accepted? It's not just about a bear coming out of the woods and trying to eat you. It's about your identity. She's keeping that safe too. So we have to contend with Amy, this like powerful impact player and invisible force that shapes how we confront the world. And in particular, how we work through issues of identity, communication with someone who is very different than us, who has a different way of thinking, being, and doing.
That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com.